Okay, today we dive into the last of the Greek art, which is the Hellenistic period. We're going to first look at, in fact, with Hellenistic period, I think we're only going to look at sculpture. Okay, is that the altar of Zeus is Hellenistic?
Yeah.
Okay. One thing I want to point out with Greek art and what makes it so much fun to talk about is the rapid style development. If you look at where we began with the archaic Kouros and then move through the classical era, and then over here on the right we have the Hellenistic era, you can see very obviously a vast change in style. And this only happens over a period of about 500 years. And if you go and think about the Egyptian art that lasted thousands of years without any change whatsoever, this is pretty outstanding. And that's what kind of makes Greek art so much fun to talk about, along with the wonderful stories that are behind these works of art. All right. I kind of want to mention the Gauls. So the Greeks down here were having trouble with the Gauls, and these highlighted areas are where the Gauls are coming from. You can see Galli right there, and it was also the Italians, the Romans, that were also having trouble with the Gauls. And the Gauls were up in Northern Europe and over in France and Germany, and they would occasionally come down and fight with the Greeks and the Romans. And the Gauls were these barbarian types. I do want to point out their magnificent mustaches in these illustrations here. They are quite wonderful for that. So that brings us to the Ludovisi Gaul killing himself and his wife. This is sometimes called the Galatian suicide. Galatian is a reference to Gaul. Say that louder, please. No, it is not. And so I will discuss why he's killed his wife and why he is in the process of killing himself. He is a Gaul that has lost the battle. He is a Gallic leader. He's a captain. He's a general, and he has lost the battle. And his near future goes something like this. He will be captured. He and his wife will be captured by the Greeks. They will be treated horribly by the Greeks. Ollie, can you wait until it's a bit noisy and distracting? And they are going to torture him before they enslave him and then eventually kill him. They are going to turn his wife into a slave, most likely a sex slave. And so his near future looks pretty bleak, which is he doesn't want his wife to be turned into a slave, and he doesn't want to become a slave himself. He doesn't want to be tortured and then killed. So he kills himself before the Greeks can do it in an honorable way, if you can call that honorable. All right. So that is the reason for this gruesome sculpture. It is part of a group of sculptures. So it would have been on this stand, and there are several other sculptures around it. And this sculpture is to commemorate a victory over the Gauls. And so the Greeks are kind of showing this guy is like he's kind of honorable to be in this act. You know, it's kind of like a show of respect. But as we walk around the sculpture, one thing I want to point out is just how dynamic it is. Look at this strong diagonal in this figure. And one thing that makes sculpture interesting is sculptures that are interesting to look at from every point of view. And by the way, this is a Roman copy of a Greek bronze. All right, moving on, I want to mention one of the other figures that is in this figure set. So here are the other figures, but we're going to focus on this guy right here. I put this picture in as to show you how large this sculpture is. And he is somebody like that. The Gauls quite often fought naked. Yeah, because they're quite animalistic, or they would go into these berserk rages. And, um, anyways, this dying Gaul, you can see him from multiple. We'll look at him from multiple viewpoints. He is a trumpeter that has collapsed on his shield, the blood gushing from his wound. You can see the blood right here gushing out. He is often, well, he used to be mistakenly called a dying gladiator, but he is not a gladiator. And a Roman historian says that the Celts or the Gauls fought naked, and the blood from the wounds was easy to see. And this is called heroic nudity in this case. If we look down on him, we can see his sword is down on the ground. He is resting on his shield over here. And then this would be the, I guess, the belt that would hold the scabbard on. And then over here, you can see the trumpeter or the trumpet that he used. And then if you look closely, he has what I'm guessing is like a dreads and a magnificent mustache, but he's wearing a torque, and so it's a piece of jewelry that they would wear that fits tightly around the neck. The Gauls did not make much monumental art, and the art that they did make was wearable. So the torque would be an example of Celtic art or Gallic art. All right, moving on. We're going to move up, way up north in Greece, and we're going to visit this island called Samothrace. And on this island, there is this previous fountain. So this fountain had water in it, and the water would cascade over this wall right here, and there would be a sculpture inside this fountain. And the sculpture was the front end of a boat with a figure on top of it. And that figure was the image of Nike. It will look something like this. And you can see Nike is holding up the wreath of victory and holding a staff, which most likely shone light. Here's another view of it. Another artist thinks that the Nike was blowing a trumpet to sound victory. Anyways, that sculpture is now in the Louvre Museum at the top of this grand staircase. And if we get a little bit closer, we can see Nike and her magnificent wings in the back. And you notice that her head is missing and her arms are missing. So we can only guess as to what her head looked like and to what the arms were doing. So some people think that she had a trumpet. Some people think that she had a wreath of laurel leaves. But the missing arm was most likely to crown a naval victor. And the right wing is not original. It is a copy of the left wing. The right wing is missing. What I love about this sculpture is that even though Nike is just standing there, it really looks like the wind is blowing around her. The wind is blowing the dress out behind her and even like up against her abdomen, and you can see the belly button. But there's a lot of dynamic action happening within this sculpture, even though the figure is just standing there. It's a very powerful and very moving sculpture. She is wearing what is called a chiton, and that is a type of dress that the women of that time would wear. Basically, it's a sheet that is folded up and then tied up on the shoulders, very similar to a peplos. And I found this to be interesting. Years after she was found, they found her hand, and the hand only has the thumb and the ring finger, and it looks like a visitor to the Louvre only had it had the thumb and ring finger missing from their hand, and that makes for an entertaining photograph. During the war, when all of Europe was being bombed, and certainly Paris was being bombed, the curators of the museum took Nike of Samothrace off of the ship, the sculpture, and built a cage around her and a ramp down the stairs and brought her down into the basement where she would be protected from aerial bombardments. All right, now moving to the island of Milos down here, we are going to look at Venus de Milo. Venus de Milo is the Roman name. Aphrodite from the island of Milos is the Greek name. But you've probably seen this sculpture before. It is the Mona Lisa of antique art, the Mona Lisa of classical sculpture. And when I say classical, I mean classical in general. Classical referring to ancient Greek and Roman artwork. Anyways, she is also missing her arms, and she is partially disrobed. Here is an idea of what she might have been doing, what her arms might have been up to. It looks like she might have been holding an apple in one hand, and that is the apple from the Judgment of Paris. Do you remember that story? What started the Trojan War was that the three goddesses came down before Paris, the shepherd, and they asked him to judge who was the most beautiful. And he chose Aphrodite because she promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, which set off the chain of events that led to the Trojan War. But anyways, the arm and the rest of that sculpture has been lost to time. Here is the backside of her. Yeah. All right, Lauren. There you go. And if we compare her to the Aphrodite of Knidos, the textbook says that the Venus de Milo is more sexual than the Aphrodite of Knidos. And I don't know if I believe that. Um, as the Aphrodite of Knidos is covering herself up before she gets into the bath, whereas Venus de Milo, maybe it's more sexual if you are in the process of disrobing than being fully disrobed. I don't know. All right, and I have a quick video, or it's a 5-minute video of some details of the Venus de Milo that are quite interesting. So everybody, eyes up on the screen.
These are all the same woman. Which one do you recognize? Why? How did the Venus de Milo, an armless ancient statue, go from being lost on a tiny Greek island to an international icon? It's part of a story that spans centuries, and a possible cover-up that starts with the missing piece right here. This sculpture is so popular that you can easily find a 3D scan of it that's really good quality, and then get it printed. And the sculpture itself provides a clue to her popularity because it contains her history. I really hope I don't screw this up. The story is hidden right here, in the scene. 1820, a Greek farmer discovered pieces of a woman carved from marble on his land. He sold what he found to the French for about 1,000 francs. Today, that'd be around 11,000 US, enough for a decent used car. They took this home, the Venus, split in two, along with some other scattered marble fragments. Venus has a bunch of imperfections. The arms were not still attached. Other flaws marked the body. She was missing her earlobes, probably taken by looters. A foot was gone. Right here. And a likely base called a plinth had broken off. That would have been right about here. Each half was meant to be joined in the center with iron tendons. Imagine two metal rods joining the two halves. The rest of the parts likely fell off due to age. When she was assembled, her scale was really impressive at 6 feet 7 inches high and with a 12.5-inch foot. It's large, Shaq-esque foot. But Venus's looks weren't the most important factor in her success. For that, you've got to look to the circumstances in which she was dug up. And the French art world, it was in turmoil. This drawing of the Sphinx was made by Napoleon Bonaparte's personal art leader, Vivant de Nom. He drew it during his tour of Napoleon's Egypt when he was searching for art to plunder. Classical art was considered the most desirable, a tie to the greatness of Rome and Greece. When Napoleon spent 20 years trying to take over the world, de Nom took art from everywhere Napoleon succeeded. He directed the Louvre Museum under Napoleon's rule and filled it with the art that he stole. When Napoleon lost his throne, that massive cache of classical art had to be returned to its owners. Suddenly, the Louvre and France had a huge problem. For example, the Vatican got back Laocoon and his sons and the Apollo Belvedere, and the Italians were reunited with their own looted Venus, Venus de Medici. The Louvre wasn't empty, but it was desperate. Then, 5 years later, Venus turned up on an island in Greece. The French were willing to do just about anything to regain the classical art that they lost when Napoleon got kicked out. Even massage the truth. Remember that plinth that got broken off of the statue? Right here. We know what the plinth looked like thanks to early drawings. By the sculptor's name on it and some other clues, it definitively dated the Venus to 130 to 100 BC, what is called the Hellenistic era. That was a problem. It was 200 years after the classical period, the one that the critics loved. So the French tried to hide it. The plinth got lost before Venus went on display in the Louvre in 1821. With the plinth taken care of, the museum's director declared Venus was definitely classical, not Hellenistic. And the Louvre supported critics who called Venus a work of classical Greek genius. They gave her a prime spot in the gallery and insisted it was certainly the well-known goddess Venus, even though she didn't have a label. Competing interpretations of what Venus's missing arms were doing surfaced, and the Louvre supported the ones they thought made Venus look most important. All of this worked. Venus held a prime spot in the galleries and became iconic. The Louvre insisted that she was classical, all the way until 1951, when they finally reversed course. Her unique fame was the result of the Louvre's branding campaign to regain national pride. It's that history that makes her the Venus we recognize. Maybe the history is the reason she's still worth seeing today. Okay, so one little public service.
All right, so that's an interesting story about the Venus de Milo and how the museum manipulated the truth to promote art in their museum. Anyways, I have a couple of other fun things for the Venus de Milo. I don't know if you've ever seen this commercial.
I work 13 hours a day, 6 days a week. So when I'm off the clock, I gotta get stuff done. So when I need a snack, I need something healthy, tasty, and easy to eat. Like wonderful pistachios without the shells. They're protein-powered, delicious, and great on the go. And that's perfect for me, a woman without a lot of time.
All right, a clever ad for pistachios using the Venus de Milo. Another ad that I like a lot that I remember from the 90s is this Bud Light ad. By the way, don't drink alcohol until you're 21.
Perfect. And the best part, in each hand, she has a cold Bud Light. Good day, gentlemen. What a waste of 2 Bud Lights.
So that is how she lost her arms. And also that goes along with what I've been saying about how easy it is to break off parts of a sculpture that are thin. And I've got one more, an ad for cigars. Don't smoke, kids. All right, so another interpretation of how she lost her arm. All right, rather amusing. All right, so back to some story time. All right, we are at the end of the Trojan War. 10 years of war, and it's getting nowhere. Achilles and Patroclus are dead. Ajax is dead. Hector is dead. Everybody is weary of this war. They want it to all end. They want to all go back home and be with their families. So the Greek generals and heroes devised a plan. Odysseus pretends to be a merchant that has been caught by the Greeks and tortured. So he knocks on the door of Troy and he tells his story that I am a foreign merchant and I've been captured by the Greeks while trying to smuggle supplies into Troy and I was tortured. So they let him in. And then in the middle of the night, Athena puts the guards to sleep and Odysseus steals the Palladium, which is like a small sculpture in a shrine dedicated to Athena. And basically, it's a good luck charm for the Trojans. But Athena doesn't like the Trojans. She wants to see Troy fall. So she is helping to destroy the Trojans. So with Athena's help, he is able to kill the guards and escape with the Palladium. And now the Greeks have the Palladium. In another day, like the next day, there is another battle between the beach and the walls of Troy, and the Greeks do very badly in that battle. That night, Trojans on top of their walls of the city can see a massive fire down by the Greek camp. And in the morning, all the Greeks are gone. The beach is empty. The camp has been abandoned. And what is left is a large wooden horse built from the wood of the ships. There is a man tied to a post. His name is Sinon, and he pretends to have deserted the Greeks. And Sinon tells them that the Greeks thought that after stealing the Palladium, the gods were angry with them, especially Athena. It was her temple that was violated. But in reality, Athena was helping them. All right, the Greeks thought that the gods would never let them win the war against Troy now that they have insulted the gods by stealing the Palladium. The fire last night was an offering to the gods for safe passage home. And let's see. The horse is also an offering to the gods for a safe passage home. He then told them that the horse was made too big for the Trojans to move it into their city because if they did, they would be invincible to a later Greek invasion. So his story convinced the Trojans because it included the former details as well as an explanation that he was left behind to die by the doing of Odysseus, who was his enemy. Among the Trojans on the beach was a priest named Laocoon. He suspected that this horse was a trick. He begged his other Trojans to burn the horse right here on the beach. In one version, he threw a spear at the horse. In another version, he set fire to the horse, which was quickly snuffed out by the other Trojans. At that moment, two sea serpents came out of the ocean, ordered by Poseidon, and dragged him and his two sons back into the sea, killing them all. The other Trojans on the beach witnessed this, and their interpretation for this was that the gods were angry at Laocoon because he threw a spear at the horse and set it on fire. Another version is that the gods are angry with Laocoon because he is a priest. As a priest, he's meant to be celibate. How can he have two sons if he's celibate? So that would have insulted the gods and therefore caused him to be dragged into the sea by the serpents. Anyway, the Trojans interpret Laocoon's death as a sign that the gods like the horse and want the Trojans to protect it. So they brought it back to the city of Troy. Now remember, the Trojans made it too big for the gates. So in order to bring it into the gates, they had to knock out part of the wall. All right, thus creating a massive hole in the wall of the Trojan city. Anyways, with the Greeks gone, the war is over, and the Trojans have a massive party that night. They are celebrating their victory over the Greeks. They are doing lots of drinking. They're doing lots of eating. And after drinking all night and eating all night, they fall into a deep slumber. While everybody is asleep, the few Greeks that are inside of the horse sneak out. They sneak up to the guards of the gate and they kill the guards, and then they signal the rest of the army that is hiding behind a nearby island to come and sack the city of Troy, which is exactly what they do. So the Trojans, the Greeks, storm the city of Troy and they kill all the women, men, and children. At one point, Menelaus finds his wife, Helen, the one that started this whole war. She was kidnapped, or she fell in love and had the affair with Paris. Well, she asks for forgiveness, offers herself to her, and so they get back together. All the women and children are imprisoned. The women are now turned into slaves for the Greeks. The children are thrown from the top walls of the city of Troy, and then the Greeks finish off Troy by burning it to the ground. I told you that story to show you this artwork. This is the Laocoon and his two sons. This is the guy that the sea serpents came out to drag back into the sea. Remember that Poseidon wanted Troy to fall. He built the wall of Troy so that they would honor him, and then they didn't honor him. So that's what made him angry with the Trojans. One thing I love about this sculpture is just how dynamic it is. These people are totally free from the block of stone from which they were carved. They are writhing. The bodies are twisting and turning. You can see anguish on their faces. The snake is a compositional device guiding the eye all around the sculpture. And like I said before, it shows a lot of twisting movement in this. therefore showing off the ultimate of dynamic action in a stone sculpture of Hellenistic art. All right, that finishes us for Greek art. Are there any questions about Greek art? Okay, we are going to move on to Etruscan art. So go to the next empty page of your sketchbook. All right, so much art history and never enough time to cover it. So let's go run through the art museum. We're going to start our next chapter, chapter 6, Etruscan art. This is a reminder. At the top of your next empty page, write chapter 6, big and bold, or you can write Etruscan art. Go to the table of contents and write this page number down next to chapter 6 in your table of contents. Also, this is a reminder that there are 5 hand-drawn sketches per chapter. All right, where is the, you know what? So I'm going to do a brief discussion right here of the Etruscans, but the Etruscans were in Italy. Italy, the easiest country to find because it looks like a boot. All right, now at this time, if you look over here on the far right, that is Greece, and just across this short little sea right here are Greek colonies on Italy. So the lower part of Italy had Greek colonies. The Romans were in the center part, that's right around the city of Rome, and the Etruscans were in the northern part of Italy. And so they were mostly in this period, this area right here that is in the orange. That was where the Etruscans were. You don't need to write this down. The Etruscans, though, had a similar evolution to the Greeks. The Greeks and the Etruscans had geometric and orientalizing. They had archaic, and then they had classical and Hellenistic, very similar to the Greeks. All right, so instead of running through the art museum, we are going to race through the art museum for the Etruscans. So there's only 3 works of art that we're going to discuss for the Etruscans, and one of them is their temples. Do you remember Greek temples? A Greek temple is basically like this, the cella surrounded. There's a couple of rooms next to the cella, and then it's surrounded by colonnades on all 4 sides. This right here is an Etruscan temple. And notice that the colonnades do not go all the way around. There is a clear facade right here in the front, and there are 3 doors because there are 3 chambers in the temple, 3 rooms. Instead of 1 cella, it has 3. And that is because they had 3 major gods. The front view, you can see there's just a couple of columns, not many. And then there is a pediment, but there's no sculpture in the pediment. There's no metopes, there's no triglyphs, there's no entablature, there's no frieze. It's a much simpler type of temple. From the side view, it's basically a room with a porch in the front of it, and that's it. There are not any temples surviving because they were mostly made of mud brick. All right, so we are going to skip past all of this, and I want to get to Are you guys ready for a story time? All right. So, this is the city of Alba Longa had a new king, and the king Numitor, who had been displaced by his brother Amilius, he banished the old king, and then he banished the daughter of the old king to become a Vestal virgin. So, what is a Vestal virgin? That is a woman in the service of the cult of Vesta. There is a goddess. Her name was Vesta, and she was the goddess of virgins. And so, all the people that were of the cult had to keep their virginity. And the the goddess is the one who keeps the light and keeps Rome lit. And in order to keep the flame lit, you can't have sex. Well, Mars sees Rhea and he falls in love with her. And 9 months later, she has twins, which she names Romulus and Remus. Emilius locks her up and condemns the twins to death. So they tell them to kill the twins. So they put them in a basket, put them in the river, and the babies float in the river. And eventually they wash up on shore, and they are found by a she wolf. The she wolf nurses them to health. They are found, and then they are raised as young men. And then, as when they become young men, they are told that they are the son of a king. So they go back and with an army, they take back their kingdom. They kill the king who had banished their father and mother. And so then they become kings. And well, and they restore their father as the true king. Then they go and set out to build their own kingdom, Romulus and Remus. So they find nearby there's a couple of hills. There's Palatine Hill and Aventine Hill. And this is the place where the wolf raised them. And this is where they want to build their new city. The brothers fought over which hill the city should be started on. Romulus wanted Palatine Hill, and Remus wanted Aventine Hill. So they, as part of their argument, they build a barrier between them. So Romulus put a border around his hill, and Remus stepped over that hill, over that boundary. They got into a fight, and Romulus killed Remus. So then Romulus creates the city of Rome, and eventually it becomes the Rome that we know now. So that is how Rome was founded. The artwork that we're going to look at is this one right here called Capitoline Wolf. And I put this picture in here to show you how large this artwork is. So this artwork tells the story of the twins, Romulus and Remus, being raised by the wolf. It is made out of bronze. Here's a detail of it. And this right here is the Etruscan sculpture. Now, there's a controversy about this sculpture. New evidence shows that this might have been made in the medieval era. When it was restored in the 1990s, they found that the casting technique was more similar to medieval than Etruscan. But as experts argue, so not everybody agrees with that assessment, and the tests are inconclusive. At the time it was made, Rome was still new and not using the she-wolf as a symbol, which is another piece of evidence that shows that this is medieval. Now, this is the Etruscan part. The twins here were later additions to the sculpture. So the twins were not made by the Etruscans, but it was a Renaissance sculptor who made the twins to go underneath the she-wolf. So we're going to do 4. Do we have time for another story? All right. So in Greece, the king expelled his son Bellerophon from the kingdom for accidentally killing his brother during a training exercise. So he roamed aimlessly and he came upon the city of Tiryns. The king and queen of Tiryns welcomed him in, obeying the principles of Zeus. The principles of Zeus says that when you accept somebody in, you have to be good to them. You have to be pleasant to them. So and you have to welcome travelers in need. A ritual cleansing ceremony cleansed him of his sin of killing his brother. So now he is good with the gods. The queen, the king's wife, sees him and falls in love with him, and she tries to seduce Bellerophon. But he respectfully declined her advances in respect for the king, which made her angry. She felt humiliated and insulted, so she vowed revenge on the man that rejected her. So she told the king Bellerophon that she told the king that Bellerophon had tried to sexually assault her. Because of the rule of Zeus, he could not hurt Bellerophon, so he sent him away. He gave Bellerophon a message to deliver to Lycia, which is a king in a neighboring kingdom. And he basically, the letter says that the fool carrying this letter tried to get it on with your daughter, so kill him. And so the king welcomes him in with the same rule of Zeus that you have to welcome in travelers. And the new king did not read the message, but he has a party for the new guest. And the daughter fell in love with Bellerophon. And then once he reads it, he felt hatred for Bellerophon. But he can't do anything because of the Zeus rule. He could not harm Bellerophon. So he comes up with a plan. A monster has been killing people and cattle in the villages. He says to Bellerophon, I need somebody to kill the monster. If you kill the monster, you can marry my daughter. So Bellerophon goes out to kill the monster. He volunteered. And Athena gave Bellerophon reins to mount and control Pegasus. So Bellerophon rides Pegasus off to find the Chimera. All right, the Chimera is a beast that has a lion's body and head, a goat's head and hind legs, and then the tail is a serpent. So they have an epic battle of Bellerophon and Pegasus versus the Chimera. And eventually Bellerophon wins, he kills the Chimera, and he brings it back to the king, in which he's able to marry and have children. Much, much later, Bellerophon, he begins to get full of himself. He calls himself a god. He says, only a god can do the things that I've done. I am going to live on Mount Olympus. So he gets on Pegasus and he goes to fly up to Mount Olympus. And Zeus says, I don't think so. So he sends a horsefly to bite Pegasus. When the horsefly bites Pegasus, Pegasus jerks and Bellerophon falls off and falls to his death. I told you that story so that I can show you this sculpture. This is an Etruscan sculpture of the Chimera. And this will be our last sculpture of the day. The mane is very stylized. but it has a nice motion to it. The curve of the back and the curve of the snake and the curve of the goat's head. You can see the wounds on it that are bleeding. You can see the wound in the goat's neck. All right. We will do the orator. Yeah, it's all right. We'll do the orator on Monday, and that'll finish us for Etruscan art. Arringatore.